Hello and welcome back to a new video. In this video, we are going to learn about the establishment of the Supreme Court at Calcutta in 1774. This is module 1.2. This is part 2 of that module. And we are going to, this is for the second year BA LLB students of the Mumbai University. This is history of courts, of course. And let's start with the establishment of the Supreme Court at Calcutta in 1774. This was the first British-style Supreme Court in India. This is also known as Crown's Court or King's Court. This was set up at Calcutta. This was established under the Regulating Act of 1773, and the official functioning started in 1774. When King George III issued the Royal Charter. Now, before this court, India only had company-run courts such as the Diwani and the Faujdari Adalat courts. These were the civil and the criminal courts respectively. But these courts, they lacked independence, and company officials often misused their authority. The British government felt that India needed a proper court functioning under the English law with judges appointed by the Crown. Okay, why was the Supreme Court created? Of course, first one was the corruption among the company officials. The misuse of the power needed to be controlled, and the company servants often acted without any accountability. So, because of this, it led to a lot of corruption among the company officials. Also, the company had got Diwani rights, that is, collecting revenue from its presidency or from its territories, and especially in Bengal, the administration was often disorganized and unfair, and people had no strong legal protection against the company's courts or company. Third was that Parliament also wanted direct control of the company, since the company was almost on the verge of bankruptcy. So the British government wanted a judicial system that reflected British ideas of law and justice. So they wanted to bring in English laws as well, which would be applicable to all its territories. And 1773 Charter also envisioned that the Governor-General and its council would supervise the courts and the company as well. So the Supreme Court served as a check on the company's highest officers. So this was a regulating act to regulate the company's affairs, and was passed in 1773 through a royal charter, creating the Supreme Court in 1774. The court also began functioning itself in that same year, and it became the highest royal court in India. Now, what was the composition of the court? The court consisted of one Chief Justice and 3 puisne judges. All judges were appointed by the British Crown directly, which made the court independent of the company control. So this is very important for the composition of the court: 1 Chief Justice and 3 puisne judges. What was the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court? So Supreme Court had civil jurisdiction, criminal jurisdiction, and Admiralty jurisdiction. It had more jurisdictions: Ecclesiastical jurisdiction and supervisory authority. So let us understand one at a time. Civil jurisdiction. The court could hear disputes involving British subjects, company employees, foreign residents, inhabitants of Calcutta, and anyone who submitted voluntarily or who came to the court. In terms of criminal jurisdiction, the court tried British subjects, European subjects, company officials. The court followed English criminal law here. And for the Indians, of course, the local Hindu laws and Muslim laws were applicable. As far as criminal laws were applied, it was only Muslim law which was applicable till 1780s, before the Supreme Court establishment. Admiralty Court. It handled the maritime disputes, shipping offences and crimes committed at sea. Ecclesiastical jurisdiction. This was related with the church, so it dealt with wills of Christians, succession issues, marriage matters involving Christians. So it was everything related with Christians. And supervisory authority. The court also supervised the mayor's court. It was still in existence in Calcutta, and other courts in Calcutta like the Diwani Adalats and the Faujdari Adalats. And it also checked the actions of the company officials. So this was its jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. Now, who came under its authority? All British residents, company staff, foreign merchants and the residents of Calcutta. Now, the problem arose when the court actually tried to extend its authority over Indians outside Calcutta, which was not clearly defined in law. So this is one important point which we need to remember, why the conflict arose. The conflict arose because the Supreme Court tried to intervene in outside Calcutta, so which was not under its jurisdiction or which was not defined clearly in the law, in the Regulating Act of 1773, which led to conflict between the company courts and the Supreme Court. This is a very important point. Now, what was the conflict involving the Supreme Courts? First, it was conflict with the Governor-General and its council. The court interfered in the administrative decisions, creating tensions. Of course, the Supreme Court had the jurisdiction to try British residents, the company officials. As we see in the civil matters, it could also call or hear matters related with company employees, disputes involving British subjects and so on. There was conflict with Hastings Adalat system also. The company courts used Indian law, whereas the Supreme Court applied English law. This led to confusion. Then there was this case of Nand Kumar. Maharaja Nand Kumar was executed, that is Raja Nand Kumar was executed by the Supreme Court, leading to public outrage. There was another famous Patna case where the company officers were arrested, causing a direct clash between the company and the court. So these 4 points are very important, which led to conflict between the Supreme Court and the company courts. Importance of the Supreme Court. It was the first modern Supreme Court in India. English common law was introduced. This led to independence of the judiciary. It acted as a check on the company authority. Also, it was the foundation for the high courts under the Act of 1861, and it marked the beginning of a modern legal system. This was the importance of the Supreme Court. Now let's go through the revision. Set up by the Royal Charter of 1774, based on the Regulating Act of 1773, 1 Chief Justice and 3 Puisne judges. It had civil, criminal, admiralty and ecclesiastical powers. It applied English law, and the Supreme Court came in direct conflict with the company courts because of the reasons that we enumerated earlier. It was also the basis for the later high courts. Let's go through the mind map. Supreme Court at Calcutta was set up through the Royal Charter of 1774. Why was it required? Of course, there was a lot of corruption, misrule, complaints of corruption and mishandling, and Parliament also wanted direct control of the company. What was the structure of the Supreme Court at Calcutta? There was a Chief Justice and 3 puisne judges. It was enacted through the Charter of 1774 and appointed by the Crown. The Chief Justice and the judges were appointed by the Crown here. What was its jurisdiction? It had civil jurisdiction, criminal, it could hear criminal cases, admiralty cases, ecclesiastical matter, and it had supervisory power over the company courts. Now, why did it went into direct conflict with the company courts? What was the problem between the Supreme Court and the company? So it clashed with the courts established by Warren Hastings. He had established this civil courts or Diwani courts and criminal courts, also Faujdari courts. Also, he had set up the appellate system there, and this Supreme Court directly clashed with the functioning of the company's courts. We had the Nand Kumar case, Raja Nand Kumar, who was executed. It was also known as the first judicial murder. First British Supreme Court. It was the foundation for the High Courts established through the Act of 1861. First time English law was introduced through the Supreme Court, whereas the company courts used to follow the Indian laws, that is Hindu laws for Hindus and Muslim laws for Muslims, local laws basically. Let us go through MCQ to understand to see how well we understand this topic. The Supreme Court at Calcutta was established in 1774. 1773 was the Charter Act. The Supreme Court was created under which act? The Supreme Court was created under the Charter Regulating Act of 1773. The Supreme Court was established by Royal Charter issued in 1774. The first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court at Calcutta was appointed by the British Crown. The Supreme Court consisted of how many judges? It consisted of 3 judges. The Supreme Court applied which law? It applied English common law. The Supreme Court had which type of jurisdiction? It had civil, criminal, admiralty, ecclesiastical, all type of jurisdiction it had. Ecclesiastical jurisdiction dealt with the wills and marriage of Christians. It was all related with the Christians. The Supreme Court supervised which court? The Supreme Court supervised the Mayor's Court as well as the Diwani Adalat courts. The Supreme Court came into conflict with which system? It came into conflict with the Adalat system established by the judicial plan of Warren Hastings. Which case caused major controversy after the court's establishment? The Nand Kumar case, where he was executed. The Supreme Court followed laws from which country? It followed laws from Britain. The Supreme Court's establishment marked the beginning of the modern judicial institutions. Admiralty jurisdiction relates to the crimes at sea. The court caused problems because it extended its authority to Indians living outside the Calcutta. Supreme Court acted as a check on the Governor-General and his council. Who issued the charter that created the Supreme Court? I think it was King George III who had issued the charter that created the Supreme Court. Which of these was not under the court's ecclesiastical jurisdiction? Wills of the Christian was, Christian marriage disputes was, succession of Christians was, Hindu inheritance was not under the ecclesiastical jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. Which jurisdiction involved hearing disputes between merchants and sailors? This was Admiralty jurisdiction. The Supreme Court was the highest court for the British subjects in India. In fact, it was the highest court for, I think, all Indians. Alright, that's it for this part of the video on the Regulating Act of 1773 and the establishment of the Supreme Court in 1774. Thank you very much for being there and listening throughout this video. If you found this video helpful, consider sharing it with your friends and subscribing. Take care, bye bye. See you in the next video.